Tonight's gospel reading comes out of the 9th chapter of Luke, verses 28 to 36 inclusive. This is a very powerful and beautiful gospel reading, especially if you're saying to yourself, I'm not as close to my family as I used to be. If you're saying to yourself, I am not as close to friends as I once was, what happened? Why have I lost that closeness? In today's gospel reading, Jesus is going to show us what it takes to foster and develop long-lasting relationships. There was this family. They had 2 little boys, Billy and Bobby. They were Irish twins, born within the same year of each other. And they were always mischievous. And one day, Mom and Dad said to Billy and Bobby, tomorrow, guys, is our anniversary. And we're going to go to a movie and dinner, so we got to bring you in a babysitter. Now, you got 2 choices. We can either bring Uncle Billy or Uncle Bobby. These 2 guys were named after their uncles. What you want, Uncle Billy or Uncle Bobby? And they both said simultaneously, like they were speaking from a tape recorder, they said, we want Uncle Billy. And Mom and Dad said, why do you want Uncle Billy? And they said, because Uncle Billy is fun. Uncle Billy plays video games with us. He chases us around the house. We'll take Uncle Billy. Well, how about Uncle Bobby? What's wrong with Uncle Bobby? Oh, he's no fun. He walks in the house, says hi to us, turns on the TV, and falls asleep on the couch. And we don't want him. When you think about your life and all the people you are close to right now, and close to in history, you say to yourself, who are the people that come to mind, your mind? Maybe your former babysitters. Who are the people you enjoy being with? Those who spend time with you. Those are the ones that make life worthwhile. Those are the ones, when you think about certain family members, those are the ones you connect to fast. Now, that's the essence of today's gospel reading. Let's take a look at verse 28 of the 9th chapter of Luke. Now, it says in this one verse, Jesus took Peter, John, and James and went up the mountain to pray. Now, when you look at that simple little verse, and it looks innocent, but there's a lot there that it mentions. First of all, we know this. Jesus did not need to take anyone up to the mountain to pray. Jesus was quite capable all by himself to go up to the mountain and pray all by himself. But he takes Peter, James, and John up on that mountain for a reason. Why? Because Jesus wanted to make sure he fostered a relationship with his 3 disciples. Jesus had 12 disciples. Now, in the Gospels and in some apocryphal books that were written at the time of Jesus but not accepted in the Bible, it mentions often that Jesus would take the 12 disciples and break them down into small groups of 3, and then take 3 fellas at a time and go out on an outing. Because Jesus realized, if I take all 12, 13 of us, they're going to splinter off into small groups, and we'll never get close to each other. But if I'm going to get close to my disciples, I got to take smaller groups. In this particular case, Peter, James, and John up the mountain all by ourselves so we could learn about each other. And there was an interesting result that happened just by spending some time with each other. Let's take a look at verse 29. Again, the 9th chapter of Luke. It says, while he was praying, that's going to be a reference to Jesus, his face changed in appearance, and his clothing became dazzling white. So right in front of the eyes of Peter, James, and John, Jesus changes in appearance. Did that really happen? Well, the answer is, yeah. Figuratively, it did. Literally, it probably did. Here's what happens. Think about all the people in your life you know. Most of us have a lot of acquaintances, people we know by name, maybe first name, last name. We might know where they're from. Maybe we know a little bit of their family members, but maybe we've never had long conversations with a lot of people that we know. Maybe if we would up all the conversations we had with some of the people we know, it might over 30 years only equal an hour. But if you take someone you know, an acquaintance, and then you go out for lunch or supper, and you spend together 1 entire hour, what begins to happen? You begin to see that person in a different light. You're going to be talking to that person, and they're going to change in appearance right before you. You might say to that person, well, I never knew you were that funny. I never saw that side of you. That's a fun side of you. We've known each other for all these years, and I didn't know you were like that. And when Peter, James, and John are spending time with Jesus, he changed right before their eyes because they saw a side of Jesus they had not seen up to this point. Why? Because they decided to spend time with each other. If you want to get close to someone in your life, there's only one way you can do it. You got to spend time with them. If you have drifted away from your family and you're saying to yourself, why are we no longer as close as we once were? Because you drifted apart. You're not spending the kind of time together as you once did. You see, relationships need cultivated. And they need fertilized, and they need nurtured, and they need work, and they need sacrifice. And more importantly, they need time. That's what Jesus Christ realized. There was a result of seeing a different side of Jesus. Peter, James, and John were excited about seeing Jesus in a different light. And let's take a look then what happens in verse 33. This is a result of what happens when you spend time with someone, what this does to your heart. As they were about to part from him, that's come down from the mountain, Peter said to Jesus, Master, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. What was he saying? What he's saying is, Jesus, this is such a glorious time. I want to build 3 monuments. So that if in 20 years from now I come back up this mountain, I'm going to see those monuments and think about the time we spent together. 4 fellas rowing in a boat in the same direction, working together, but conversing and enjoying each other's company. I never want to forget that. See, Peter was right. He knew something that's true of life, all of our lives. Peter had no idea if the future would be better or worse. All he knew was right now, right today, with all these fellas, Peter, James, John, it doesn't get any better than this. You see, think about it for a moment. This is chapter 9. We've been talking about now chapter 9. But by chapter 20, compositionally, 6 months later, chronologically, Jesus would begin the road to Calvary, and Peter would stand by idly. He didn't know that was going to happen. You see, Peter was right. This is chapter 22, compositionally, 6 months and 2 days later, chronologically, Jesus Christ would be crucified, and Peter, his buddy, would deny him twice. You see, Peter was right. Peter didn't know if the future would be better or if it would be worse. All he knew is right now, right today, this very moment, it doesn't get any better than this. Why? Because Jesus, when you made the invitation for us to walk up that mountain with you, we said what? Yes, we'll go up together. And then we'll talk and we'll converse and we'll learn more about each other. We'll grow deeper in love with each other. Our bond will form tighter with each other. That's how you grow relationships. You know, as a priest, I don't do marriage counseling, but I do a lot of spiritual marriage counseling. Couples are having troubles, and after they call me, they'll come into my office, and I try to help them out spiritually. Now, when a couple comes to my office and they're having trouble and they need some spiritual assistance with whatever problem they might have, the first thing I do is I set the parameters, the groundwork. And I tell them, look, if this is going to work, we're all sitting around this round table, the 3 of us, you got to be honest and truthful. If you're not willing to be honest and truthful for what's going on in your heart, this isn't going to work. So to be honest and truthful. And then what I'm going to ask is when one of you is talking, the other one does not interrupt. Because if they're starting to say something that is painful, not necessarily hurtful, but painful, you're going to want to respond to that. You're going to want to defend yourself. But we're trying to find out what's wrong. So when one is talking, the other one listens but does not interrupt, and then you'll get your chance. Now, after they agree to those parameters, and if they don't, then we can't continue. But once they agree to those parameters, then we start a conversation. So I had this couple in my office a while back. And I set up the parameters, and they all agreed, and then they got started. And a wife went. And this is what she said. She looked right at her husband, which was an excellent thing to do. Because when a person looks at me, but they're talking to the spouse, that's not a good sign. So she right at her husband because she was the problem. He was the source of her hurt. And she said this to him. She said, when we first started a date and we would sit in a car, I was sat right next to you in a car. They apparently obviously had a bench seat, not a console. But she sat right next to him in a car. And then when we first married and we'd go for a walk, we'd be standing right next to each other so we could hold hands. And then when we sat on a park bench and you'd sit down and I'd sit after you, we sat together. Now that's no longer the case. I'm on one end of the car, you're on the other. If we walk, which is seldom, we're never close enough to hold hands. And when we sit on a park bench, you're on one side, I'm the other. And that has always bothered me. Now, that's one of our problems. When she got done talking, and he never interrupted, and then he looked at her, and these incredible big tears start coming out of his eyes. And he said to her, you're right. When we dated, we sat next to each other in the car. I drove and you sat next to me. When we were so close together, we held hands. And in a park bench, when I sat down first, you sat down right next to me. And with these huge tears coming out of his eyes, he said, you know what happened? What went wrong? And she said, no. And he looked at her and said, what happened is this. You moved. She moved. She slid over to the other end of the passenger side of the car. She stopped walking close so they weren't able to hold hands. And as usual, on any park bench, he would sit down first, she would sit down second, but she started to go to the other end. You see, they were both hurting. They both had a legitimate concern of what was going on, and she was upset that they stopped doing those things, and he had apparently been eating the fact that, I want to do those things, honey, but you moved. Slide back over. I remember when I left my office, and we talked about many other things. They said, well, clearly what we know is this. The one thing that really hurt, maybe one thing that gave seed that allowed your separation to occur is the fact that you moved. Slide back over. Sit back together on a park bench. Go for a walk and be so close to each other you hold hands. And if you still have a bench seat in your car, sit up against probably just a console with that which you cannot do. But you see, that's what happens in life. That's what Jesus Christ is talking about. How do you get close with each other? How do you develop lasting relationships with people you love and friends? It takes work and effort. And if you move and you slide to the other side, you can't. The only way to do that is to do what Jesus did. He said, Peter, James, and John, buddies, I'm going up on a mountain to pray. You want to join me? And they said yes. And when they said yes, everything changed. They saw a different side of Jesus. That's why his appearance appeared to change. That's why Peter realized that in hindsight, I'm glad we spent that time together. Because shortly after that, Jesus, you died. That's how life works. If you are sitting there tonight saying, why am I no longer as close to my family as I used to be? Why am I no longer as close to my friends as I once was? When you look for the answer, maybe it simply is this. What went wrong? Maybe the answer is, you moved.